a hoot though, man. Austin's really cool.
There's no parking, not like.
Alright guys, hey, thanks for coming. We'll get started here. If you have any desire to grab water, it's around the corner. So if you go to the left and there's a kitchen up on the right. There's a bunch of cups there so you can grab water, fill it up. There's also pizza in the back there. Feel free to grab some. Tonight we're going to be talking about how to buy small apartment buildings. So my name is Jordan Moorhead. I'm a realtor here at Keller Williams Integrity Realty, which is why we're here, or why we are here. But I'm a real estate investor, I guess, first and foremost, and was before I got a realtor's license. And that's what really my passion lies. And small apartment buildings are a big part of my portfolio. So I know that most people start with a condo or a single family or a duplex and want to move up shortly after, and that's exactly what I did. I started living in a duplex. I renovated that duplex, moved out of it after a while, sold it, and then took the proceeds to buy a small apartment building. Oh, took proceeds to buy 2 small apartment buildings. But even while I was living in the duplex, I saved so much money because I didn't have any rent. I had a roommate, I had an Airbnb guest in my unit, and the unit above me, I had it occupied by a long-term renter. So not only was I not paying any money to live in this duplex, I also made a few $100 a month and paid nothing for the repairs. So I thought it was a pretty good idea, moved out of it after a while, and sold it to buy more apartment buildings. So I guess the first thing I'm going to go over here is, and this is all just apartment buildings that I've purchased over the last few years. So this one was the first one I bought. This was when I was living in the duplex. This is in Louisville, Kentucky. Address is 3215 Kimmons Drive, if you're ever in Louisville and want to drive by. It was bought in 2017. It was built in the early 50s. This one I bought with owner financing with a 15% down payment, so I didn't quite have enough to do the 20% down payment. I asked if the owner by chance would finance it. The owner was looking to finance it because he was retiring and he wanted to still have that steady stream of income, but he didn't want to go fix the toilets and do all the work he'd been doing. He'd been self-managing for 20 years or so. He'd owned this for almost 30 years. Well, he'd owned several on the street for almost 30 years. And in this case, owner financing or seller financing was a really great option for him because he wanted to still make money, but he wanted to be out of state so he could enjoy life and enjoy the rest of his days doing whatever he wanted to do and not going over and fixing issues at the apartment building. So owner finance with 15% down. I bought this through a real estate agent in Louisville who actually happens to be my father. Really convenient, yeah. It was fully occupied at the time. The rents were fairly low. They weren't horribly low for the area, and I'll get into some other issues here later, but the rents were low and they really didn't have great tenant selection criteria, so the way they ran their business was kind of just by the seat of their pants, and this guy was managing this all himself and didn't run it like a business. It was really a cash machine for him at this point, so he'd owned it for 30 years, completely paid off. So let's say he's making over $3,000 a month, he's probably pulling in close to that in profit. He's pulling in close to $3,000 in profit per building, and he owned 4 on the block. So he was making a pretty healthy income from these 4 buildings and didn't have a lot of incentive to keep them in great shape or to keep the rents high, and that's the case with a lot of older landlords or long-term landlords. These buildings might be paid off. They might have bought them at a time where they were a lot cheaper than they would be now. So keeping the rents up high and keeping the revenue high just isn't worth doing all the other work you'd have to do that. So let's say he could get $1,000 a month for a unit, but he'd have to spend several $1,000s a month on it. Or he could get $700 a month for a unit and just leave it the way it is. It's probably easier for him and more cost effective for him to leave it the way it is and to continue to operate it sub-marginally compared to where it could be. So in this case, that was what he was doing. It was in poor repair. The major items were working, the HVAC, water heater, roof, all the big things were working. As you can tell, the windows are a little older, but they work. So the next two buildings I bought that first building when I was living in the duplex, so I was able to save up enough money when I was living there, because I was essentially living for free and making a few $100 a month to buy the first one. This, I was part of a package that I bought after moving out of the duplex and selling it about a year later. So this is right down the street. It's a different address, but it's actually on the same block, and it's just on a street facing this way, other street faces this way. Bought it in 2018 with another one right next door to the other building as a package. Used the same agent. This was the only property listed right here. So this property was listed on the MLS. The other property was not. He was not looking to sell both. He knew that he probably needed to do some repairs to the other one before he put it on the market. It slipped out of the listing agent's mouth. Yeah, you know, we've got one down the street that we're gonna sell here soon. And I said, hey, well, why can't I just buy both of them, and I'll buy them as a package right now? So we negotiated a price for the second one combined with this. And this one was fully occupied. It was in decent shape. This is probably the best of the three. And it doesn't look good because somebody went around the curve and crashed through the fence when they were driving their car. But besides that, the building's in pretty good shape.
I thought that was a parking spot.
Yeah, oh, it was. Yeah. So the road kind of does a little S curve going down it, and I guess he came too fast and forgot to take the S curve and just kept going. But yeah, this building was in the best shape. I've actually had the most headache out of this building just because of the people living in it when I bought it. And I didn't love this, but the bottom two units, so these are all sixplexes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 underneath. Bottom two units were occupied by a commercial lawn care company. So the lawn care company paid the rent. The workers lived in the units. They didn't really have any incentive to take care of the units or to call maintenance and fix them up. These guys recently moved out and there was all sorts of issues that needed to be fixed. I think I did 2 furnaces, repairs to both kitchen sinks, some light repairs to the bathrooms, lots of stuff just because they didn't care. I probably would not move in a business again. Unless it were, you know, maybe a white collar business or something, so. But I can't not recommend having businesses in there because they always paid the rent on time. The rent was paid first of the month, every month, no problems. When it came to getting the security deposit for some of the issues that were left, the guy said, hey, you can just have them both. I'm not gonna even contest that these guys maybe left these units in rough shape. So.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying the lawn care company rented out the units for their employees?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, so.
fascinating.
Yeah, so the employees just didn't really have, I didn't have any recourse against the employees,
Right.
only against the lawn care company, which actually kind of did help in this case. They
So
were
you just-
very understanding, they were fully willing to take care of any issues. We provided them fairly affordable housing for 2-3 years, and I didn't own it on 2 of those years. And, you know, they were fine just forfeiting the security deposits. This one was fully occupied in a decent shape. Oddly enough, although this was in the best shape, the rents were lower than the others. So the current owner had bought this a few years ago. He lived out of town. It was kind of out of sight, out of mind for him. The property management company he had just wasn't the best. It's hard to find a great property management company that really has your best interest in mind, and I'll talk about that later too. But they just kind of let things go. So this building was in decent shape. This building was in pretty rough shape. This was not currently for sale. It had the same owner as the other building I just showed, Goldsmith. It had severe deferred maintenance. One unit was completely uninhabitable and had been the owner before this owner's storage unit. So he just uses the storage unit because it had so many issues with water and mold, and he just said, hey, I'm not gonna fix them, I'm just gonna use it as a storage unit. This guy took it over and didn't do anything about it even then. So he owned it for 2 or 3 years and didn't fix the mold and water intrusion issues. So anybody that knows mold and water intrusion, it didn't get better over the few years of not being fixed. It was in really rough shape when I took it over. A lot of the units were under market rent, probably because the building was just in rough shape too. So market rent isn't really high for this area, but they were fairly low rents even for the area. So I purchased both these buildings with commercial financing with 20% down. Also, with the first building I had there that I picked up owner financing, that was a 3-year term. So I was getting close to being done with that loan. I just took that building, refinanced it under the commercial loan that I was using for these, and rolled them all 3 into one loan. So talk about that a little bit here in a second. Commercial financing has different terms. So residential is typically fixed 30-year, 15 or 30-year loans. Commercial financing is very variable. So it could be anywhere from 3 to 10-year terms. The amortization schedule could be anywhere from 15 to 30 years, sometimes even exceeding that. But on the end of these 3 to 10-year terms, it either readjusts itself or you have to pay it off. So my 3-year owner finance loan had to be paid in full at year 3 or refinanced. I just went ahead and refinanced a little early. So for both of these buildings, the purchase price was $703,000. Part of the reason I bought in Louisville at this point in time was because I was looking at a 6-unit building in Columbia Heights. It was $703,000. So when I bought this first one, I was looking for something I could get into. I didn't have a ton of money. And obviously I didn't even have the 20% down I needed for this. But I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. My dad's a realtor there. He set me up on a search. A couple months into that search, I found this property. He lives right down the street and went and looked at it almost right away. And I just kept buying in the same area. But this worked really well for me because I knew this area very well. I'm from not far away. You could ride a bicycle from where I grew up to this area. So how to find small apartment buildings. And in my head, small apartment building is anywhere from 5 to 20. Now that's an important distinction because there are larger groups like syndicators that will buy 40+ unit buildings and use other people's money to do this. Now they want to keep deals flowing because how they make money is by getting deals done. So lots of syndicators get paid an acquisition fee, or they get paid a fee from doing deals. And obviously they're making their investors money, and they're making money off getting these deals done, but they get these fees at the beginning of each deal. So it's harder to compete in that realm when you get over 40 units or so, because people are using other people's money to do this. Also, once you get over 5 units, it scares a lot of people because residential financing is no longer available. Those 15 and 30-year fixed loans are no longer available. But if you understand commercial financing, it's not that intimidating. Tim, who should be here sometime soon, actually uses it for all of his properties because it's just more flexible. Residential financing is fairly strict. There's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have guidelines that they follow and make sure that every loan has to fit in this little box. Commercial financing, there's really no box. It's whatever works, especially when you're working with a local bank or, let's say, owner financing. There's no box at all. So how to find these? Residential agents can help you with smaller apartment buildings. So the MLS in most areas has a commercial section. So in Minnesota, there's a commercial section of the MLS. Now I don't see stuff on the MLS much bigger than 20 or 30 units, but 5 and 6 and 8 unit buildings are plentiful on the MLS. Those don't really make it to commercial brokers, so they're not on CoStar and don't get listed on LoopNet or anything like that very often. Most people that are selling these smaller buildings have been in the residential space before they were in the commercial space, so they know residential agents and that's their first go-to. So if you're looking for a smaller building, a residential agent can be a good option. Another option is a commercial broker, so somebody that networks with local owners, has access to CoStar, which is an expensive subscription, so most agents don't have it. Another option is also to mail owners. So This is 3215 Kimmons. 3218, which is on the other side, looks just like this. After buying 3 buildings on this street, I decided it was a good idea to mail all the owners and just form relationships with them in case they wanted to sell. Turns out the guy that had 3218 wanted to sell. I wasn't in the position to buy it, so I sent it over to my father. He closed on it. Works out great for me. He's there all the time. So I have 3 buildings on this street. He has 1 building on the street. He self-manages. He's all over the place. So I have eyes on my building all the time, or buildings. But mailing owners definitely works. And also building relationships. So why I was trying to build relationship with the owner of these buildings close to my buildings is I know when they want to sell, I'm going to be the first person they're going to reach out to. So if you have relationships with people in your area and they know that you're looking for these certain things, you're going to be the first person they think of, rather than going to an agent or trying to figure out what to do with the building. They're gonna say, hey, you know, I know Frank, he's always talking about he's looking for an 8 unit or a 10 unit. I have an 8 unit, I'm just gonna go talk to Frank. So it's really easy when people know that's what you're looking for. Yeah.
Hey, Jordan, going back to mail owners, so do you get data from MLS you filter by 5+ units and just have a short list of who you want to mail to? How did you go about finding the owners?
So I actually looked up the so I knew the property addresses. The only way I've had mailing owners work, I do a lot of direct mail. I probably do 200 pieces a month. I get a response to that maybe every 6 months. When I send an actual handwritten note, or at least a note that's typed up and signed by me, I get a much higher response rate. So I looked up the properties on either side of my properties and the properties in that small area, and even if I couldn't find the exact owner's name, I could get the LLC name. I could look up who's the managing director of the LLC. So I'd actually look up that exact person's name, and I pay for a software where you can get people's addresses. So if I can put in your address, I can figure out, put in any one of your names, I can figure out where your address is, what your phone number is, and anybody can do that. If you go to Premium White Pages and pay them $10 a month, you know, nothing's not available. So that's, you know, really the only thing I've had work when it comes to mailing people, is actually identifying specific buildings, getting their address, writing them a letter. And in the case of 3218 my father bought, he didn't call back, but his broker who managed the trust that owned the building called and said, hey, you know, we actually are thinking about selling this rather soon. What do you think about it? And we got to negotiating and I connected them, and you know, the rest is history. But yeah, I think handwritten letters to that person is a lot more personal. Anybody that owns any sort of rental property gets a lot of direct mail, because you can buy states of out-of-state or non-owner occupied properties. You can buy lists of all this. So if you're just buying a list of owners that have equity, or owners that don't live in the state, or owners that don't live in the property, chances are they get tons of mail. I still get mail from my first duplex in Northeast Minneapolis, forwarded to me from the post office. And people just haven't updated their lists, I guess. So I'm getting mail, and I haven't owned it for 2 years. So it's, yeah, the lists, although I know they can work, it's never worked for me. Just actually identifying specific properties, having a reason to say that. So I was able to write in a letter and say, hey, I own a property right next door. I want to buy this property.
You mean identifying, driving by it, not through a list or map search, and just drive by, jot down the address, that's what you mean identifying?
Well, yeah, no, in this case, I identified a property next door. So mine was right here, this one was right here. I said, hey, you know, I own, at this time, I owned 3 properties on the street. I said, hey, I own 3 properties on the street. What would you think of selling this property to me? And it was an easy end. Because I could say, hey, you know, I own these, I want more like this. You know, what would you think? And turns out he was interested in selling. They would have listed shortly after, but I didn't have to compete with anybody, because I got a hold of him right away. So he was already motivated and already thinking about it. I just, right time, right place, I guess. And I think it's going to take a lot of shots to do that. It's like I said, I send out roughly 200 pieces a month. Every few months I get a call, you know, so it works, it just takes a while. And the more personalized you can get, the better chances you're gonna get to get a response. So, how to finance? I'm by no means a commercial lender. This is just my personal experience. So, commercial financing, it's roughly 20 to 25% down. It can get to be more than that. So they evaluate properties on debt service coverage ratio. So let's say your property makes $1,250 a month and their mortgage payment's $1,000 a month. That would meet their 1.25 debt service coverage ratio, which is the most common. So they want to know that your property is going to make over and above the mortgage to a certain amount. You're not going to find a commercial lender that has a 1 debt service coverage ratio. There's just no way. Because then if anything happens, you're not paying the mortgage. You know, if the water heater breaks or anything else breaks, you're not paying the mortgage. 1.25 seems to be the most common that I've run into. I know commercial lenders in Minneapolis that will do as low as 1.15. But I think most of your goals are to make money. You probably don't want to buy a property that has a 1.15 debt service coverage ratio unless you just know something that everybody else doesn't. So 1.25 debt service coverage ratio is what I've typically seen. And that means that percent down can adjust quite a bit. So you could hit a 1.25 debt service coverage ratio if you put down 80%. And they might require you to put down more if the debt service is higher than the income. So you can make it happen. It's going to adjust that debt service coverage ratio depending on how much money you put down. So I think mine were at 1.3 and I was allowed to put 20% down. If I was at a 1.22, I might have had to put 25% down to make that debt service coverage ratio go up to 1.25. See, it goes up the more money you put down. But with commercial financing, it's typical to see a 5 to 10 year term. Now I know that there's up to 12-year terms. I just don't see them happen very often. I know my father has a 10-year term. I have a 5-year term. I've seen anywhere in between that, 5, 7. There might even be a 3, but there might be a 12. If you get on the really high end of commercial financing, I know they get up to being fixed in longer terms, but that's in properties that we're not talking about in this meetup. So seller financing is no rules. However, you can negotiate with the seller. If the seller owns the property free and clear, they could give it to you with 0% down, and you could pay them a certain payment every month. As long as they're happy with that, there is no regulations with it. Typically, it's 10 to 30% down. I don't see seller financing coming in any less than 10, or I've never seen one. I'm not saying that there aren't any cases where it could be, because again, there's no rules. But typically it's 10 to 30% down. They're gonna want a big chunk of money right away. They're selling this to make money and make money long term, but typically when somebody's selling a property, they want a big chunk of cash right off the bat. So that's why 10 to 30% down is what you're gonna see. They might have a 20 to 30 year amortization schedule and maybe a 3 to 10 year terms. They might want that money, they might let you borrow money from them essentially so you can fix the property up and refinance in a few years. But they might want the money back in 3 years, which was the case with mine. He was totally fine letting me have the property and pay him for a while as long as I would refinance in a few years. So amortization schedules, how long's the, yep.
From a mindset standpoint and a practical standpoint, where did you kind of become okay with, like, from a residential standpoint, you want, okay, 30-year term, 30-year amortization, like it's all good. And then
Yeah.
you look at commercial financing, you've got a balloon payment and I guess not very risk tolerant. So I immediately go to, well, what the heck is the lending environment going to be like in 10 years? What if I can't refi and have this bubble payment? Kind of from a mindset standpoint, how were you able to work through that? Or were you like, no, it's gonna be fine, I'm taking a risk, but we'll figure it out later?
A little of that, but you can also underwrite your projects to see what they'd be like at a higher interest rate. So I looked at so 7% is typically a historical interest rate. And over a long period of time, mortgage has been roughly 7%. So I underwrote it, what's it gonna look like at 7%? And, you know, maybe I have to sell, what's that gonna look like if the market changes? So I try to buy projects where I can inflate the value, so add value to the property to a certain point where I could sell and be okay. But also I'm gonna underwrite it and see what's my mortgage gonna look like at 7 or 8%. And I don't, you know, I don't wanna say I don't think, because I don't know what interest rates will be in 5 years. But I knew when I bought it, interest rates were already creeping up, so there's a high chance that in a few years it would be 7%. Now, since I bought, interest rates have actually come down, which I did not predict. And that's why I don't try to predict things, because I'm surprised as much as anybody else. But yeah, I think that you'll underwrite it, worst case scenario. What's it look like if interest rates do go up to 8% or so? You know, in all likelihood, interest rates will probably go up in the next few years because they sure can't go down a whole lot more, but again, I might be wrong. I could be completely wrong. Interest rates might be 1.5% in 4 years. Who knows? But I just assume for the worst, and go from there. And I knew if interest rates went up to 8%, I was okay. I wasn't gonna be making a lot of money, but I would be okay. And yeah, so with commercial financing, the banks look at you and the property as compared to residential, where it's almost all property. Residential, you're buying somewhere, the bank wants to make sure you can pay the mortgage. Now, if you're buying a multi-unit with residential, they do take into account the rents, but it's still mostly on you. With commercial, they're more concerned, and this is why syndication works, they're more concerned that you have the down payment and you at least have some net worth to back up the purchase. So they're not so concerned, are you gonna be able to pay this mortgage? Because I don't know how they underwrote it, but I probably couldn't pay the mortgage if I didn't have the rent coming in. I couldn't pay the mortgage month after month and still be in a good spot for all these properties. There's no way. But they were underwriting it based on the property also, not just me. So, big question is, where do I buy? You know, you can hypothetically buy anywhere. Minneapolis, St. Paul, as most people know, and as I also found out when I started looking for small multi-units, is fairly expensive. And I think that just looking at the purchase price and not all the other things, all like what's the cash flow look like after you purchase? What's the upside look like? So I know of lots of people that are buying in, let's say, I don't want to pick a city, I know somebody's buying it. Let's say Pierre, South Dakota. I don't want to actually pick somebody that I know is buying in the city, just in case they're watching right now. I'm fairly certain nobody I know is buying in Pierre, South Dakota. I have a feeling it's really cheap to buy in Pierre, South Dakota, because it's not a high growth area. So you could probably find an 8-unit for $200,000 in Pierre, South Dakota, maybe less. I'm not familiar with Pierre, South Dakota. But where's the upside in Pierre, South Dakota? So I bought places that I knew and understood. I currently own in Austin and in Louisville. I'm from Louisville. I have lived in Austin for a while at a certain point in time, 4 years ago. I lived in Austin. I lived in Louisville for 21 years. So I know the area fairly well. I know everything about it. Like I said, my dad's down the street from the properties. I'm fairly confident that there's some upside in Louisville, and I see things happening in Louisville where it's going up. But I really do recommend buying places you know. So where do you live? Where does your family live? Where do you want to move in the future? What do you know about this certain area? And there are ways to figure this out, but for a smaller apartment building, you need to at least have some connection to the area. So let's say your aunt and uncle live in Dallas, Texas, and you go down and see them once a year already. So why not buy an apartment building in Dallas, Texas? You can write that off. Now you can go down and see it twice a year. You can go down and see them too. But again, small apartment buildings are just too small to just buy one in a market. So I learned that from experience. Just having one out of area and not having a big reason to go see them, and even having a few, not having a good reason to go see it. And if it can't finance the trips to go see them, it's absolutely not worth it. So small apartment buildings are too small to just buy in one market. I don't recommend buying in markets just because they have good deals. And this is a personal opinion. But Pierre, South Dakota might have really good deals, just falling out of the ceiling, you know, but where's your upside in Pierre, South Dakota? Where's the rent growth? Where's the population growth? Where's the job growth? What do you know about Pierre, South Dakota? If you're from Pierre, South Dakota, by all means, you have some upside on everybody else that's looking to buy in Pierre, South Dakota. But you want to do some due diligence on the market you're looking at, and you also want to have some sort of personal connection to the, well, personal opinion, you want to have some personal connection to the market you're looking at. And if you're just from Minneapolis, St. Paul, maybe you stay around Minneapolis, St. Paul, that's fine. I know lots of successful investors that have never left the market they've grown up in and where they currently buy and live in. No, nothing wrong with any of that. Getting a property under contract. It takes roughly 3 to 6 months to identify a property in my experience. When you're shopping out of state, especially in a competitive market, it can take quite a bit longer. If you will find your property. Probably not gonna cash flow very well, but commercial lending kind of backs you up in those ways. So they wanna make sure the property makes money, at least enough money to cover their debt and a little bit extra, so you don't lose the property. But it's gonna take some time. It takes 3 to 6 months. It takes 2 to 5 offers. It's gonna take a little bit of money. You're gonna need roughly 1% earnest money, sometimes a lot more than that. You need $700 to $900 for an inspection on a smaller apartment building, and that's been my experience. And then roughly 3% for closing costs. And even to take you seriously, they're gonna need some sort of proof of funds or pre-approval from a bank. Now my experience with the seller financing was very simple. He made me fill out like a proof of income that you would have a rental or a renter fill out when they came to rent an apartment. So that's all I did, and he gave me a $307,000 apartment building. I'm guessing I came off confident enough to make him believe me, but he didn't check very deep. He did a credit report. I'm self-employed, so nobody to call and ask if I actually have the job I have, but he didn't verify very much. Now, lenders, a regular commercial lender, is gonna go a lot more in depth to you and both the property. They wanna see a lot of financials from the property. They wanna see all your bank statements. They wanna know what you're gonna name your firstborn. Anybody that's bought a property's dealt with a lender. It's a lot. Even commercial lenders, they want a lot. On commercial properties, so on residential properties, most lenders will not let you put it into an LLC right off the bat, because that is transferring ownership to somebody else other than you. Commercial properties, they require an LLC in almost all cases. The lender will require you have it in LLC, so you at least have some protection. Most lenders will also require that you have an agreement with a third-party property management company. So you might need to get going and meeting property management companies before you buy a small apartment building. So I know my lender, the first guy, I managed my first 6 unit from afar. He didn't care as long as I was paying him the mortgage every month, and that's totally fine. The second lender, which was US Bank, on these 3 buildings all wrapped into one, wanted a third-party property management agreement signed and turned into them before we even got going. So they knew day one, Premier Property Management, which is my property manager, was gonna go in there and take over rent collection, take over management of the buildings. They didn't trust me to do it, which probably because I'm out of state, probably because it was a larger loan. I don't own a property management company, but I'm a real estate professional and they still didn't trust me to do it. I asked them if I could manage them myself. They said, no, you have to have a third-party property manager. So when it comes to picking a property manager, there's a lot of them. Renters Warehouse is a bigger one around here. I would want to know, do they have experience with this type of asset? I probably would not hire Renters Warehouse to manage a small apartment building. Now there is lots of great ones around here, like Nexus Property Management. There's property managers that specialize in small apartment buildings, because there's a ton in Minneapolis, St. Paul. There's lots of small brownstones. There's plenty out there, and there's lots of property management companies like KRC. There's quite a few other small ones. Where I kind of ran into problems at first, where I didn't get referrals from people that owned buildings. I got referrals from people that knew of property management companies, and I went through a few before I found my current one that I love. So, something that got me is I was looking for price right off the bat without taking the whole thing into account. So my first property manager charged 6 or 7%. The fees on the other end were really high. So for any maintenance or repair fees were just astronomical. The final straw with me for my first property manager was, so I happened to be in Louisville and I went in an apartment that had been vacated. There was a little trash, probably as much trash as we have on the tables here. Not a lot, a trash bag or two worth of trash. I got a bill for $350 for trash out. And I guess they figured, hey, he's not here, he's not gonna know. And his explanation was, oh, we had to order a dumpster. Like, hey man, there's trash cans out there. You could have gotten some guy to pick this up in a bag. If you would have sent me a $50 fee for this, I would have understood it. But $350, and there was a lot of fees like that adding up. They were just astronomical fees. So get referrals, talk to people who they manage buildings for. If you don't have anybody you know that refers you to them, at least ask for references and say, hey, how does this person do with your building? What are their fees like? What are they charging you? How are they structured? You're gonna need more attention than a single family due to the number of units and the typically amount of work these units are gonna require compared to somebody living in a single family house. The nice thing about single families are typically people treat them like home, and if something goes wrong, they're gonna fix it. I just got our maintenance request for 2 burnt out light bulbs. Most people that have a single family are gonna fix their 2 burnt out light bulbs. I'm not gonna call you. It's probably quicker to go fix it. And anymore you put an LED in there, it's gonna last 20 years. But you're gonna need somebody that's structured to deal with this type of thing. And like I said, lower percentage isn't always a good thing. You wanna take the whole thing into account. What do they charge in fees? What are their fees on top of just the percentage? My property management company charges a half month's rent for move-in. Other property management companies with lower fees were charging a month's rent for move-in. So that eats into the profit right there. The lower fee was just negated by charging a whole month's rent to move in. And I've even heard of property management companies like Renters Warehouse. You familiar with what they charge?
No, not.
I've heard up to 3 months.
Wow.
For, not Renters Warehouse, just in general, the property management companies will charge, depending on how long the lease is. If it's a 2-year lease or a 3-year lease, and then they'll all charge lease renewal fees too. So you wouldn't think you'd be charged when somebody renews their lease. It's a common charge. To renew the lease, it's $50, $100, couple $100. So make sure you know their fees before you sign on that dotted line. Because the percentage is definitely not all that matters. I pay my property management company 10%, and I happily do, because they keep all the other costs in line too. And
Who do you recommend around here?
around here, I like Nexus quite a bit.
Have you heard anything about VSM real estate?
I didn't know they had a property management company.
Yeah.
I know VSM.
Yeah, I have or they manage my property.
Do you like them?
I think so.
How long have you been
I don't know
managing it?
anything else, so.
How long have you been managing it?
It's been almost 6 months.
Okay. I've heard great things about Housing Hub in St. Paul, but I
Okay.
haven't used Housing Hub in St. Paul, no.
I've been shown houses that they've been trying to liquidate, and
Yeah.
they're a pain to deal with, like
Yeah.
trying to get information from them. So
Yeah, no, I've shown a lot.
Yeah.
I think a lot of property managers are trying to go more into the sales side,
Mhm.
and it's what I've seen recently, and I think it's best to stay in your lane with whatever you do. And yeah, no, I've dealt with them with a lot of, on the sales side, but I've heard great things about their property management
Okay.
company. And I'm sure we're managing the properties they're now listing.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of property managers, you wanna pay attention to this too, in their agreement, have something that say, hey, when you're ready to sell, we have first shot at selling the place for X amount of months. So if you have a broker or a realtor you wanna use, make sure that's not in there, because when you go to sell, they might have first crack at it. And if you don't want that, you're gonna want to take that out of the contract. So due diligence. With any size building, never trust the broker's numbers. On my first building, the broker's numbers were very rosy. The rents could all be $900 and just these crazy rents that didn't work in the area. But never trust their numbers for income or expenses. You wanna verify rents. Current rents they're gonna list and say, oh, you know, it could be $1,800 for this unit. And if you verify that in the area, they're only renting for $1,600, it's no issue to the broker. They didn't do anything that they shouldn't have done. Because in their pro forma, they're typically gonna say, you know, verify all the numbers. But don't trust their numbers. It's good to get an idea off of, and sometimes usually they'll be in a range. They're not gonna be $2,000 when the rent's $1,000, but they might be a little higher than they could be or should be. They may even be correct for units in this area, but just in much better condition. So, you know, my units are all in fairly good condition. They're $750 to $800 for a 2-bedroom. There are units in the area that are getting over $1,000, but they're in much better condition with stainless steel appliances and brand new bathrooms and kitchens. And you know, my units aren't that, so they're not gonna get $1,000. And you need to know that when you're looking at the broker's numbers. They might have just looked at rental comps in the area and might not have been too detailed in their rental comps. So look at current rents and comparables in the area. Use Rentometer, Zillow, Craigslist, Facebook, and if you are in the area and can tour apartments, definitely do that. See if you can see what people are paying in the area and what they're living like, and know the difference between, let's say, a 1900s brownstone in Uptown and a 2018 built apartment building down the street. You're gonna get much different rents. So know the difference when you're looking at rentals, and don't just look at the rent number. Look at the condition of the apartment. Compare finishes of what high rent apartments are getting to what it would cost for you to get the same from your units, and maybe it's just not possible to get. So a 1900s era building in Uptown is not gonna be the same as the 2018 build down the street, ever. You know, it might get close and you might be able to find comparable rentals to what you're looking at, but you're not gonna be the same as a brand new build. So another thing is you wanna assume property taxes will go up. The city's gonna reassess this property when it changes hands, and when you paid quite a bit more for it than the previous owner did, your taxes are gonna go up a little bit, sometimes a lot. So on my property in Austin, the guy that was lived in Austin was out here, but they were $4,400 when I bought it. He paid $50,000 for it in the 60s. They went up to $7,700 after I purchased it. So they can go up quite a bit. So look at the city, look at the city's historical record with property tax increases. Try to figure out what similar buildings are being taxed at, and you'll have a general idea, but really just assume they're gonna go up, because they probably are. I've never seen them go down. So they're probably gonna go up, they might go up a lot. Something else you wanna also do, and I learned some hard lessons with this, is verify the ages of all mechanicals compared to the ages of how long they last. Try to figure out the condition of the plumbing, the windows, the doors, the electrical, the roof. Really any and all capital expense items that are gonna need to be replaced. With mechanicals in my buildings, I've learned that it's great to have 18 different units that all have separate heating and AC, but there's also 18 different furnaces and air conditioning compressors. So some are new, some are older, a lot of them are older, and I'm having to replace a lot of them. And that affects my bottom line. So if I would have been more diligent in looking into that, I could have negotiated the price down a little bit. I could have gotten some repair credits for these air conditioners and heaters that are going out. But just pay attention to the ages of everything, and know how much it's gonna cost to replace them. So I know that for me, I can get a furnace and an air conditioner in Louisville, Kentucky done for a little over $3,000. So I know I've got 18 units, let's say 10 of them have older heating and AC. I need $30,000 set aside somewhere to do this work over a period of time. And I don't recommend just budgeting that you're gonna do this out of the cash flow, because it's maybe forward break it once and you have to do them all at once. you're gonna have to come up with, let's say you're making $2,000 a month, you're gonna have to come up with a lot of money. So, you're gonna wanna know the condition of all this stuff, the condition of the plumbing, windows, doors, all that, etc. When were the units last updated? What's the condition of the common areas? What do the parking lots look like? The landscaping? What's it gonna cost to make all this look nice? So common areas are fairly simple, usually carpet and paint. If they're in bad shape, what's it gonna cost to redo the entire common area? And that's not a huge area in a small apartment building, but it's the first thing people see when they come in. So you want it to look nice. If you're trying to show it to new tenants and you have this sparkling, clean, great unit that you're gonna show them, but it looks like just a total rat hole when they walk in, they're not gonna get a good first impression. Yeah, get quotes, don't guess. I've had a lot of work done. I still am not good at guessing or estimating rehab costs or as good as I could. I know certain things, like this is what heating AC is gonna cost, this is what a water heat is gonna cost. But for a certain number of square feet of carpet and paint, it's best to get quotes. You wanna know, because the price can vary quite a bit depending on the area, depending on how high the ceilings are, depending on what you need to do. So make sure you lock down your financing during the due diligence period. You don't want your lender to say, oh, you know, by the way, your debt service coverage ratio is 1.2. You gotta bring an extra $20,000 to make it a 1.25. You wanna get as final as you can on the financing. Now, it's not done until you're closed, but you wanna kind of push them and say, hey, this is my final number. This is exactly what it's gonna be. And if you find a good banker, you'll have no problems with it. And I've got great bankers here in Minneapolis, if anybody wants one, so definitely let me know after this. Also, during the due diligence period, you're gonna request utility bills, owner's tax returns, and all maintenance records. The owner can give you the page on their tax returns that has their properties on it, so you can get exactly what they're making off the property, and they can get records from their accountant. So you're gonna wanna verify what they pulled in, what they spent. Maybe the expenses are a lot higher than you think when you see the owner's tax returns compared to what they said they were, so you wanna verify all that. And any maintenance records they might have. So maybe they replaced 10 of the air conditioners a few years ago. You're gonna wanna know that.
Jordan?
Yep.
How receptive have you seen the owners being towards giving out their tax returns?
So they just have to give you one page, and and it doesn't list anything else. So it doesn't list any of their private information. It doesn't list any of their income outside of their rental income. I've not really had any issues getting that.
And you can request it,
Yeah.
like in the purchase agreement, you can say.
Yeah,
Part
absolutely.
of the agreement is I see this.
Yeah, and I can't remember exactly what page it is. Is it Schedule E? I think it's Schedule E.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so if you request their Schedule E, most brokers or agents that are dealing with this type of property will understand that and be able to convey that to the owner. So I haven't had any issues getting it. Maintenance records, that's another story, almost non-existent. So a lot of times their records won't be very good. You're gonna need to pencil them out for yourself as best you can. So, property takeover. After you close, you're gonna wanna make sure your property manager gets payment and contact info to all the tenants, which if you've got a good property manager, you really don't have to worry about this. They're gonna do this on their own. You wanna start with common area rehab to make sure your current tenants understand new management and ownership is taking care of the building now. So if the building's been falling apart and current tenants see you come in and redo all the common areas, they're gonna be excited that, hey, this current owner's gonna take care of the place. Now expect that in the first few months, you're gonna get a lot of maintenance calls. Because if you're buying a building that has a lot of deferred maintenance, like I have, there's a lot of things the previous ownership did not take care of, and the current ownership's gonna take advantage of somebody actually responding to them and ask for all these things. So I'd say the first few months, expect to be inundated with this, and set some money aside to fix all the issues that the current ownership did not fix. I've got that in here. Fix all the broken issues in tenants' units. So we went unit to unit when we took over all these buildings, and I had the property manager ask them, hey, what's wrong with this unit? What can we do to make this right? And there was quite a bit of stuff. And you're surprised how much people don't take care of buildings. Because they were making good money off them regardless. They don't need to fix them and get the rents up. So, also do a little bit of landscaping. A little mulch and shrubbery and just taking care of the lawns can go a long way. So, it's easy just to mow the grass and let the weeds grow and let all of the areas close to any structure get really out of control. But if you have a good landscaper come in, or even just a good lawn care company come in and do some trimming and lawn work, it can look a lot better. I'd start to rehab the vacant units and plan turnover on the units that will be coming up for renewal / moving out. So whenever you're taking over a property and your property manager starts to talk to people, some people will be moving. They'll be moving out of the building, they'll be moving out of the country or state. So know that and plan to start rehabbing those units. And take care of the ones that are already there. That's where you can test your rent theories. If you think you can get the rents up 20% and you do your rehab on it and you can actually get them up more than that, great. But if you're conservative in your numbers, you've got a lot of room to figure things out. So, first year. So I've got a good buddy who's a landlord in Louisville. We grew up together. We were talking on the phone the other day. You probably won't make any money for the first year or so taking over a building with a lot of deferred maintenance. I think that's almost always the case, unless you're just hyper analytic and can look into it and figure out everything needs to be done up front and take care of all of those issues right off the bat. So if you can do everything right away, you rehab all the units right away. Let's say the building's 80% vacant or 80% occupied. If you can get most of the tenants out and raise the rents up in the first few months, which is highly unlikely, first year's gonna be great. But I know most larger people even plan on the first year or first few years being lower income years. I know a lot of syndicators that don't promise a return for the first year. So they'll take your money, they'll do the work, and then after a year or so, getting the property turned around, the leases turned over, the units turned over, then you're gonna start to see some profit. So don't plan on making money in month 2. Unless you're buying a fully renovated building, it's in great shape, and then your returns are probably not gonna be so great anyway. So the building needs operations and physical conditions turned around. So operations mean regular maintenance calls, just dealing with the tenants. Everything to do with running the building, which is certainly a job, and that's why it's best to hire a property manager on anything more than, let's say, 10 units. But it's gonna take a while for this to happen, and that's why the year, well, I don't think it's a rule, but that's my rule. It's the first year I'm not gonna make any money. It's gonna take a while for you to raise rents, reduce expenses, and rehab the building. So for raising rents, you gotta wait at least a year, because people are gonna be there and get out. Reducing expenses, also, so I went around, changed all the faucets and shower heads in all the buildings when I bought the buildings, and I got the water bills down quite a bit by going to low flow faucets and shower heads. So with 18 units and probably 50 people living in them, that's a lot of showers. So if you can get the expenses down by reducing water consumption, fixing any electrical issues. The electrical's not gonna save you a ton of money, but going through and just putting LED bulbs in every fixture is a smart thing to do, because you're gonna have less burned out bulbs and you're gonna save a little bit of money. So rehabbing out of cash flow, I've got this in here, is not the prudent choice. You should try to get most of the issues corrected ASAP so it doesn't affect your bottom line going forward too heavily. There's certainly cases where you can pick up a building with not having a lot of money and rehab out of cash flow over time. It's just probably a riskier way to go, because if you have more issues, then you're not gonna have any money set aside to take care of those issues. You're not gonna be able to get your cash flow up as quickly. So at least set a little bit aside. I always assume that it's gonna be at least 5 to 10 grand, even on a property, even 1-2 unit property that needs a little bit of work. It's gonna be a couple grand to fix it up. And maybe over time, it gets to be not much money every month, but if you've taken care of the bigger issues, you're in good shape. Ongoing operations. Regardless of having a property manager, you're gonna need to check in on your properties at least bi-yearly, regardless of where they are. Even if they're in Minneapolis, St. Paul, you probably wanna drive by them every few months. probably wanna go in on them every few months if you're managing it yourself. If I'm managing them myself, I try to go in every quarter. Property manager, I think, does it bi-yearly, but you wanna go check on your properties. These buildings were all in Louisville. Property manager is over there quite a bit, but whenever I go, I always find some little thing that's been missed, because I have a different eye, I think, looking at it, 'cause it's my property, it's my money. And they're great too, I love them, but there's just some things that you're not gonna see unless you're there. So we had a homeless guy living in his car behind the building, and I think everybody thought he'd gone away. Last time I went there, he was there again. So I was able to call the towing company, I was able to call the police. We've been working to get him out, but we just weren't aware that he was still there. So you need to go, you need to check on it quite a bit. Even if you have a property manager, you still need to work with the property manager. I did a live stream with Tim, and I did a live stream with my property manager here recently. I talked to him probably at least once a week. A lot of other times more than once a week. So we're working through issues there. Like I said, my father lives miles away and has a building in the same area, so I talk to him probably every other day about the properties. It's still work. It's not completely passive income where you're not doing anything, but you know, I'm not going over, I'm not fixing anything, I'm picking up the phone. I'll take it. So, keep everything in great shape so your revenue stays high and your tenants stay happy. So if stuff's in great shape, you're gonna have tenants for a longer period of time, you're not gonna have as high of turnover costs, and you're also gonna have an easier job managing your property manager. So if the property manager is not dealing with as much BS, they have less to talk to you about in the way of BS. And also, regardless of your strategy, whether it's buy and hold forever or buy and hold for 3 to 5 years, you're always in better shape if the property is a month or two out from being sale ready. So if it's in decent shape, and to get sale ready, maybe you gotta repaint the common area or something small like that, you're in a lot better shape. So where if you've got a 6-unit building and it's in great shape, and or an 8-unit building and stuff's going really well for 8 years, and then you go to, you're just curiously looking around other properties and you find a 15 or 20-unit building that's in great shape. And maybe you've got the money that you could use with this 8-unit building to buy that building. Now, you can put the 20-unit building under contract, almost immediately list your building and go roll that money into the next building. So it's easier to do 1031 exchange when you already have the property identified, and that's what I did with these 2 properties. The last 2 that I bought, I had them identified. Then I sold my current property I had that was already in good shape and was able to roll the money over into it almost right away. So keep your properties in decent shape, not just for the tenants, but for the purposes of, you might need to maximize revenue when selling it, and you might not have 6 months to get it ready. You might have 2 weeks. So issues do arise. If you have a really sensitive issue arise and it needs your immediate attention, obviously jump on that, but something that's emotional and triggering to you, you might want to wait a day or 2 to respond to. So that's why when I manage my own properties, I try to do most communication through email. I've had bad times responding to text messages from tenants. And it's easier to respond to an email logically and calmly over a day or 2 period of time than immediately responding to a text message. So people don't expect that an immediate response on email. Just take advantage of that. If something horrible comes in, oh hey, I kicked the neighbor's dog and I caused all these issues, maybe you respond tomorrow morning. Wait until you're calm and clear-headed and then respond. Nothing wrong with that. People don't expect an immediate response. When it comes to the sale, what are you gonna do with the proceeds? You're gonna pay some sort of taxes unless you're 1031. Just have a plan. Maybe paying capital gains is fine. You know, in every sale, there's a purpose for the sale, whether it's just to take the money out and be done, or it's to move on to other properties, or you know, you want to go on vacation, whatever you want to do. Make sure you know what you're going to do with the proceeds and figure out your tax strategy. So figure out what you're going to do with them and then work backwards. So walk the buildings and all the units before the sale and make sure everything's in great shape. So before you even put it on the market, maybe a month or two before you put it on the market, if you can, walk all the units, walk through every unit, look through every nook and cranny, ask the tenants what's wrong with the building. This is your time to fix that and make sure it looks great. When this works for everything, if you're doing a duplex and you're gonna sell that here soon, do that too. If you're selling your house, you're gonna have a realtor come over and walk the units with you, or the house with you. Do the same exact thing when you're selling a small apartment building, because it's gonna matter. People will pay more for buildings that are in good shape, or that look to be in great shape too. They might be in great shape, but mechanically, but then just look awful. People aren't gonna pay top dollar for that. So have professional pictures taken. You still have to market the building, and nice looking buildings sell for higher prices. So good pictures are what's gonna get your property noticed when it's online, and everything is online in one way or another. It's either on the MLS, it's on LoopNet, it's on CoStar. It's gonna get sent to somebody in a digital format. They're not sending out books or packets with these properties. I get properties sent to me all the time, it's in a PDF packet. So make sure your pictures look great. And make sure maybe you're a great photographer, then do it. I'm not. I have professional pictures taken, so I know better. Also, when you're going to sell, have all your financials and rent rolls together for the broker and agent. You're gonna wanna think about like the same things we talked about. They wanna see your Schedule E, they wanna see your rent roll, they wanna see your financials, they wanna see some utility bills. Provide as much as you can. The better people are able to make a decision, the better it's gonna be for you. All right. One other thing. North Star Real Estate Conference is coming up September 20th to 21st. We're gonna have 25 plus rockstar real estate speakers and lots of networking. There will be people there that do anything from flip houses to syndicate large apartment buildings. We're flying in people from all over the country. All the proceeds are going to charity, Junior Achievement. It's a great way to meet people that are doing what you want to do and started just where you started. So all of these people started, whether it was buying a duplex or starting with a single family house, whatever, they all started somewhere, and now they're all doing big stuff. So the CEOs of companies, these are people that own large private equity firms, all kinds of people, syndicators are coming and speaking to you guys, and this is gonna be a great way to do that. All proceeds are going to charity. The early bird special ends August 10th. It's early bird for $100 off. It's gonna be $199 at this price. It might be $195. I could be completely wrong there. But nreconference.com. Any questions for anybody?
What was the address again? Where do we find it again?
Oh, www.nreconference.com. If you enter North Star Real Estate Conference into Google, it'll pop up there too. But yeah, enter it there. $100 off right now until August 10th. And then it's gonna go up to $299. Like I said, all proceeds are going to Junior Achievement. We're just doing this for charity and networking. It's a great way to network. I've met a lot of cool people going to conferences. I probably go to 2 to 4 conferences a year. Somehow they all end up at the same time. I'm going to 4 this fall. And we went to one this winter, so 5 this year. But that's how I've met a lot of the cool people that have come to speak at this meetup. That's how I've met a lot of the people that I'm working with across the country. So I've met a lot of people in Minnesota. It's a great way to network. And the people that are coming to these conferences are people that you want to know. People that are spending $200 and taking their weekend to go to something like this are people that are serious about real estate investing and people you want to know.
Often here in commercial A, B, C, D buildings,
Yep.
can you kind of give a rough explanation of what condition that is?
I'll show you a C building. So there's not a set criteria like this is in the dictionary type criteria. A, B, C, D neighborhoods too. So D neighborhoods like a war zone. A neighborhood is YZ up. And so somewhere in that spectrum, a lot of people would consider like first ring suburbs of Minneapolis B neighborhoods. I would too. I know people that consider Minneapolis, St. Paul, Metro C neighborhoods, And I don't disagree there, and I'm not saying anything, but the probably higher crime and lower income. And that's what A, B, C, D neighborhoods. D neighborhoods are really high crime, very low income, lots of unemployment. A neighborhoods are on the exact opposite. Almost zero crime, minor petty crimes, and very high income. So Wayzata, Lake Minnetonka, $200,000 plus a year income. With buildings, it's almost the same thing. A is built in maybe the last 10 years. It's in great shape. It's getting top of market rents. You really don't have to do anything to it when you buy it. So one of my good buddies works for Greystar Property Management. They're the largest property management company in the world, and they have a number of buildings that they manage and own in Minneapolis. Most of them are in A and B areas. So building or funds this size, or the size of, like, let's say BlackRock, which is a large fund that's traded on the New York Stock Exchange, they buy buildings and they will take lower returns, but they need something that has like really little deferred maintenance. A Class A building in North Loop, for example. So probably built 8 years ago, 6 to 8 years ago, in great shape, doesn't really need anything. When they're selling a building right now, they went through and cleaned up every little issue. So there's nothing. You're just turning it on. So that an A building's built in the last 10 years, basically you just turn it on. You're probably going to get a much lower return for an A building. In Minneapolis, it might be a 3 cap or a 4 cap, if you're lucky. So you're not going to get much of a return at all. But for a REIT, they can accept a lower return like that. A D building, there can be a D building in a B neighborhood, so you might be able to find a building in Plymouth that's just completely fallen apart. It's probably needs, a quarter of the purchase price to be rehabbed. It's uninhabitable, would be a D building. A C building, so for example, this building, when I picked it up, was a C building. People wouldn't live there unless they didn't have any other options to live there. And that's not really what I wanted. It was a C building in a C area when I picked it up. So not high crime, but there's some crime, there's some drug use, there's some issues. The building was in horrible shape. It needed a lot of work. To at least feel comfortable even, it needed quite a bit of work. So I would say that's a C building, needs a lot of work. It's nice to buy C buildings in B areas. That's the objective you can, or what most people want to do. You want to buy a building that's lower quality than the area, so you can improve it and make the area, or make the building worth a lot more. B building, in my opinion, is 30, 40 years old. Has some deferred maintenance, but for the most part, it's in decent shape. Let's say a building built in the late 80s, early 90s would be B. And it needs some updates and some upgrades. It might be getting close to needing, new furnace units or a new roof or any sort of thing, but it doesn't need a tremendous amount of work to make it in great shape. So there's really a spectrum, and there is no hard and set rules with the spectrum, but there are some really loosely associated rules with that. Anybody else?
What are you seeing for cap rates in the metro right now? I guess especially, I'm assuming it varies a little bit from the smaller buildings to the bigger buildings, but yeah, the smaller buildings, say if you were to find a 6 unit in a decent area in OSP, what are you seeing for a cap right now?
So we looked at one the other day, and I think currently it was around a 7 cap. After doing some work to it, it probably would have been an 8, 8.5 cap, and he could have again sold it at a 7 cap, so it would have been worth more. But I'd say in C areas, you're looking close to a 7 cap, and A and B areas are getting really hard to make work in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So again, in my head, C area is most of the city, for C minus, C plus, there's a plus and minus you can use on both sides of this too. So I'd say C minus area, you're gonna see 7 to 8 cap. C plus, probably closer to 6, you know, so it just depends.
Right.
And a lot of times with these smaller buildings too, cap rates probably aren't as big of a consideration for the broker, the buyer, the seller. They're more concerned what are the building down the street sell for. So I know for these buildings, for example, I bought these all in the mid 300s. One sold next door to this one for 400 grand. Now there's 3 other people on the street that are trying to sell their buildings for 400 grand. And they just don't consider cap rate so much, so their
You still
rents
look
are.
a lot from a residential lens of
Yeah.
comparable stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, yep, and the comparables do matter in commercial too, but, yeah, so, you know, they're not gonna consider what am I getting for rent, and what's the guy next door getting for rent, they're saying, oh, well, this sold for that, and I'm gonna list this for that, so it's still a lot comparable.
But that's not how lenders value.
Oh, yeah,
That's because the owner wants that to happen, it's not necessarily because that's how lenders value.
and because the owner wants it to happen, they might talk a real estate agent into it. So, as an agent, a lot of times you find owners wanna sell properties for way more than they're worth, and sometimes you just gotta do it, but a good agent will talk to the owner about what the price really should be, and you won't list it at that. So, if you can show an owner this is what so if you're mailing a property off market, you wanna buy it for X amount, and you can show an owner, hey, this is what this is worth, and this is what money it would make, you might have a chance. Most owners don't care how much money you're gonna make off the property, they just care how much money they're gonna make off the property. So if they're gonna sell it for 400 grand and make 80 grand, they're pretty happy. You know, just because you're saying, hey, well, I can't, so I was talking to a buddy about this building that's about to be for sale for 400 grand, he said, I can't make money at that number. That owner doesn't care that you're not gonna make money at that number. Somebody might find that they need to take a 1031 some 1031 money, put 200 grand into a building, and they can make money at that number. You can't with 20% down though. Like Tim said, the lender's not gonna finance it if it doesn't meet the debt service coverage ratio.
Right.
You wanna come up and talk about lending a little more? So Tim is a lender. He knows a lot more about lending than I do. So I'm gonna let him talk about what kind of lending you'd be using to buy these buildings.
Yeah, what'd I miss?
A lot.
I'm just kidding. All right, yeah. So did you talk much about lending, and did you talk about your
A
loans
little bit. I talked about what I've done.
for terms?
Yep.
Which I would say you got good terms, especially when you got them,
Yeah.
you know, so. All right, so, you know, when we talk about small apartment buildings, I guess it depends on the area what the values can be, right? When you're looking at buildings in the 300,000 range, it's pretty clear, it's pretty simple. You're gonna get the loan from what I would call a community bank. Not everyone calls them that, but if you wanna think of places like Sunrise Bank, Bremer Bank, there's a Citizens Bank, 21st Century Bank, those places that you see that generally might have anywhere from 1 to 6 locations, that's where you're probably gonna go to get the majority of those loans. You can get loans from bigger ones, like Jordan got his from US Bank, Wells Fargo, but you're a really small fish to them. And frankly, they're not gonna try very hard to get your business from what I've seen.
Well, I think mine was a higher loan balance than 300, so that's probably what I was able to get done with them.
And there's not as much competition in your area, so they
Yeah.
actually need your
Yeah.
business, right? In the Twin Cities, Wells Fargo doesn't need you to buy a $500,000 apartment building for them, they just don't care. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to go there to get that loan. But having said that, there are a couple different loan types. So if you these things are going to change if you cross over $1 million loan. But when you're below $1 million loan, then the only lending choices are these banks that I would call community bank. The nice thing is they're somewhat relational based. So if you already have a relationship with them, that can help. And it can make some small differences in how they underwrite your loan and what terms they give you. I don't want to overplay that because they have guidelines. All of these banks have, they get audited and they're very concerned about how their audit's going to look. And anytime they give you certain exceptions to guidelines, that can affect their audit. And I've become over the years friends with a lot of these bankers, and they stress over these audits. It's a big deal to them, and so they are cautious on what they do. But some of them, it's kind of like wiggle room with inside of their guidelines. They're much more comfortable with that as opposed to straight up bending or like doing something that doesn't meet a guideline for them. So Jordan mentioned it. If it's a smaller one and you're at one of these smaller banks or one of the community banks, you can get a rehab loan to fix up a property. And so what you might do, just depending, all of this is going to depend on the numbers, right? But if this is possible to do, is you could get you get your purchase price, you add on your rehab amount, and then you subtract your down payment from there. So if your purchase price was $800,000 and your rehab was $100,000, you're at $900,000. Your down payment would come off of that number. For the most part, the majority of the lenders that I work with, they would, if that was a loan structure you wanted, they would require 25% down. They might also shorten up your amortization term. So if you're familiar with residential mortgages, we always talk about a 30-year loan, right? And that is not only in residential mortgages, that usually how long your rate is fixed for, but it also is how long your payments are spread out over, right? It's 360 equal payments. Well, on an amortization term, these banks will give you amortizations of...
There's markers underneath there.
They'll give you an amortization term, but that's not necessarily how long the loan lasts for, right? So, so the loan actually might be a 5-year loan, but they'll amortize it over 20 years. So in 5 years, the loan is due, right? So it's a 5-year loan. But they'll spread the payment out over 240 months, okay? So the loan isn't 240 months, but the payments are as if the loan is 240 months. They'll also do 300, or in some cases 360. So this would be 20, 25, 30. This is where you might see some of that variance. This might be where if you're your terms are going to vary based on your experience too. So if you're looking at doing one of these things and you're first-time operator and you don't have someone with experience on your team, highly likely you're going to see something like this, a 20-year term, right? Highly likely. Especially if you're looking for rehab funds. If you're unexperienced, they might not give you rehab funds, just for the record. That might require some experience, at least in residential rehabbing or something like that. They will. That's a cool thing about these smaller banks, these community banks. Sorry, they will take experience like that and use that as part of their criteria. Also, partnerships. If someone in the partnership has that experience, that's going to help. So this is going to affect your cash flow, right? 20-year versus 25 versus 30. So that's going to be one of the factors, and that's one of the negotiating points they might work on with you, depending on your situation. For example, a lot of the banks I work with don't really like doing 30 years on these loans. A 20 and a 25-year amortization to them is less risky because it's building up equity a little quicker, right? So they prefer that, but if you've got experience or there's other factors that they like, you've got a track record with them, they might go to 30 years for you. They might also, I have a bank right now in very small, and I don't know that they would do this on apartments very much, but on the smaller stuff like a 4-unit, 3-unit, 2-unit, that kind of stuff, they're doing interest only for the first 18 to 24 months while you rehab the property, and then they convert it after that to a 20 or 25-year term, depending on your situation. This 5-year loan isn't the only option, it's just the most common. They also, I'm seeing actually a more common than it used to be is 10 years, because what banks are finding out anyway on the 10-year loan is that they just don't, their regulators aren't as tough on it, and they don't have to, it's not as much work for them. So what they do is they give you a 10-year loan. The interest rate is really never fixed for more than 5 years at a time. So at the 5-year mark, you'll start out with one rate. The 5-year mark, it'll adjust, and then it'll go another 5 years, and then it will term out, and you'll be forced to either refinance, sell, or basically just renew the loan. Renewals in this are a little bit of a formality. They generally will renew you. If you made your payments on time, most banks will renew you without much effort, and it's extremely inexpensive. It's not like the cost of a refinance. It's a few $100 in most cases.
So once you renew, do you get back at the top of the amortization schedule?
No, most of them will just basically keep the same amortization schedule, keep going. But it's there's a little bit of negotiation that can happen there, but for the most part, no, they would just basically continue the same loan at a new rate and just give you new paperwork. And the reason why they do this is their regulators require, they can't, these banks, since they're portfolio owned, unlike a traditional loan where you get on your house, those loans are bought and sold on Wall Street, right? There's open free markets for those, and so they're never being funded by the place that you go to. Even if you go to Wells Fargo or US Bank and you continue to make the payments to them forever, they don't own your loan. Most people think, oh, I went to Wells Fargo, I have a Wells Fargo loan. It's owned by Freddie Mac. That's who Wells Fargo sells all of their loans to. Well, virtually all their loans to. In this case, it's the bank's money. Sometimes they're borrowing some money from the Federal Reserve or other products, but it's their money and it's their depositors' money, right? And so in order for FDI insurance, for them to maintain FDI insurance and other things, they are required to renew these loans. They can't keep them long-term. So you wouldn't even be able to ask them for, let's say, a 20 or 30 year loan. They wouldn't be able to give it to you even if they loved you. It doesn't matter to them. So, okay, so down payments, 20% is possible. I think it's not very common. I think 25% is what you're going to see much more often. But again, it's going to depend on your situation. But for the most part, especially if rehab funds are involved, you're going to probably see 25% as your down payment. Right now, okay, so I was just talking to a banker today, and he offered one of my clients 4.55 on a duplex for a 5-year loan on a 25-year amortization with 20% down. However, if that same thing was an apartment building, you'd probably be looking at 5%. He said they're not very, I shouldn't say committed. They're not as interested in getting apartments right now because they're afraid that they're overinflated in value. So they are charging higher interest rates on those loans as opposed to a residential. This 4.55 is super aggressive though, by the way, because I don't know anyone else below 4.8, and then everyone else on the same loan would be 5% or more. So that 4.55, that bank is really trying to get that business. So just something to keep in mind. What happens is when I said this is a 5 or a 10-year loan, the terminology used for that is a balloon. So at the end of the 5 years, the loan balloons. Just a little terminology. And balloon basically means it ends. You have to pay it off in one way, shape, or form, whether that be through a refinance, a sale, whatever else. Every single one of these loans is going to come with a prepayment penalty. There might be an exception to that, right? Maybe you can negotiate it out with extremely high rates or high closing costs or something, but I've never seen one. They all have some form of prepayment penalty. The low end of that prepayment penalty is like 1% of the loan's balance for the life of the loan. What I see more typical is something like for the first few years, maybe even 1 to 3 years. It varies. They're all going to be different, and this is definitely a negotiating point. But it might be 3 for year 1. It's 3%. Let's do it like this. It might be something like year 1 is 3, year 2 is 3%. That is year 3 is 2%, year 4 is 2%, and then year 5 is 1% all the way down to whenever the loan balloons. That would be a more typical structure of something you might see for something like that. It will depend on the terms you're getting though.
That's the prepayment penalty?
Yeah. A typical one. It's not, again, I'm giving you very generic, right? Because each bank is going to be different, and they might give you a different prepayment penalty than you just based on experience and other factors. And loan size. Keep in mind, so like if it's a, to us, $500,000 may be a big loan. To a bank, it's not a very big loan. And they have to do a lot of work for that and stuff like that, and the underwriting, and they're not gonna be super excited if you pay them off right away, so they might have a bigger prepayment penalty. If it's a larger loan that they're really excited about and you're a higher credit borrower or a more desirable loan to them, then they might give you better prepayment terms too. So those would all vary. Each bank's gonna treat this a little different. One of the banks I work with, they only charge a prepayment penalty if you refinance with another lender. They don't charge one if you sell or just pay it off in cash. Okay? So that's not, I have another one, they charge 1% no matter what happens. But they never charge more than 1%, so it does vary quite a bit on that one. But you can expect to see it. It's not really the end of the world, you know. It's really just think of it like, especially if it's 1%, it's just like adding to your, it's like, you know, they're charging you 1% on the front and 1% on the back someday if you don't term it out. Now, if you get to the end of this term, there's no prepayment penalty right now. What else? Those are, so if you go to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, they offer these sorts of loans too, but those are on larger loan sizes, so 1 million and up. Freddie Mac calls theirs the SBL loan, small balance loan. And I'm personally going through it right now. I'm getting one for an apartment building in Louisville, Kentucky, actually. They're different, okay? Their underwriting guidelines. So there's, let me see here if I can start to explain. So I'll back up a second. If you go to one of these commercial banks, in theory, they're not expecting you to repay the loan, but the bank to repay the loan, right? So there's a lot more emphasis on the property and how it performs on paying you back. So at least in theory, they're not super concerned about you. That's not entirely true though, right? They still want to, they definitely want to see at least acceptable credit, and to them that's going to vary. So it's hard for me to even tell you what that's going to be, but they want to see acceptable credit, and they do care about your personal finances to some extent. But I would say it is pretty loosey-goosey, and that varies based on their comfort on how experienced you are. They're much more concerned about how good of a job you can do than how much money you have in the bank and stuff like that. Freddie Mac, on the other hand, they know that everyone who's buying $1 million home isn't even, or $1 million plus apartment building, they don't have to have a lot of apartment experience because it's going to be managed by a professional management company, and they are more concerned about your personal finances. So, for example, for us to qualify for this loan and to get, you know, terms that we're happy with, we have to have the people who are signing on the loan have to have enough assets to equal the transaction size or more, right? So it's a $4.5 million transaction. We had to have partners that had at least $4.5 million in net worth. We also had to have a minimum of 10% liquidity. So the loan in this case was 3.7, so they required, you know, liquidity or cash of $370 some odd thousand, and that was after putting 10% in. So it's really 20% if you know, in order to qualify for what we wanted. Their prepayment penalties are much more severe than what you would consider in this. Their prepayment penalty, you can starts out at 5. What is it? I forget the exact number of years, but I believe it was 5% for the first 3 years. It could have been 2, right? So, but something like that, and then it goes down to 4 for a few years, and then it was 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, something like this, right? Something like that anyway. That might not be exact. That's the good ones. You can buy these out by taking a higher interest rate, which makes a lot of sense, by the way, if you plan on selling, because the interest rate increase was pretty minimal. I think it was 1/10 of 1% to take all these down to starting at 3. So the prepayment starts at 3 instead of 5. So that was a pretty big deal. But that was one alternative. Another alternative they have, they'll give you a lower interest rate, but they have what they call yield maintenance. And essentially what that means is, I'm probably not going to do an excellent job of explaining this, but in a nutshell what it is if they're giving you a certain rate, I think we're at 4.5 something, 4.58 maybe, by the way, these don't lock in until the very end, so that might not even be our final rate, but we were put in somewhere in that, like that a month ago. They would give you a lower rate than this, but a yield maintenance situation is they lock in this rate, and then if you go to sell, or you wanna refinance with someone else, if they can't get a current rate of that or better, you have to pay them the difference. So it's huge amounts of money, huge amounts, because you're talking on millions of dollars. So if even the interest rate market went down to 4.3, you'd have to pay them this difference is your penalty. And so it's massive amounts of money. It really means that you can't, in some cases, if the market's just too much, you can't even do anything. You're stuck in the loan. Or you have to sell the property with a loan that's not competitive, right? This is not at current rates. So I feel that that's always a bad strategy. They offered us much better terms to take that, but that's because, why wouldn't they? Now, you're off the hook if rates get worse, okay? So if rates get worse, that kind of goes away and there's no prepayment penalty, but I don't know who wants to gamble on that, I guess. In our particular situation, our goal is to sell it in just a few years. So we're guaranteed to pay a prepayment penalty unless everything goes horribly wrong in the market and we just have to hold the property for 10 years. Otherwise, we're guaranteed. Interest only is extremely common. And that will be based also on the rate you pay. So we're paying a slightly higher rate to get interest only for the first 3 years. They offer a 2-year with a slightly lower rate as well. But these are minor changes in the rate for those kind of differences.
Example?
Yes.
On the smaller, say like the community bank loans, are they generally assumable or not? So say you're buying, and it seems like it wouldn't be a very common scenario, but say you were buying from somebody that's in the.
I would say, okay, so without being, if I'm gonna generalize, I would say yes.
But I suppose it's so.
But very case by
often
case and
specific.
very negotiable.
Gotcha.
Yeah. If they like the building, they don't mind keeping it. But for the most part, what they would prefer to do is, give a new loan at new rates. So that would be the hard part. Like for example, if you were at 4.5 and current rates were 5.5, that would be really hard for them to do that. It'd have to be really similar to current market for them to probably want to do it.
Gotcha.
But dang near everything's negotiable on that, and it's probably easier to get a loan through a bank that's familiar with the property, especially if you're a retaining property manager, because a lot of this, keep in mind, like, my day job I do okay, but there's no chance in heck that I'm paying the mortgage payment on Legacy Apartments in Louisville, Kentucky if things go south. I can't do it. Freddie Mac knows that, so that's why they underwrite for some of these other factors. So the buildings they have to be comfortable with the building, the area, stuff like that. These small community banks, it's a lot about area management, those kind of factors. Jordan mentioned this at one point while I was here, and the seller's numbers matter. So our terms got worse from Freddie Mac when our lame duck seller of the property just let it go to S in the last couple of months, and he stopped giving a crap, and the performance of the properties dropped significantly since we went under contract, and the down payment increased by $140,000, and then they offered us the wonderful prepayment penalty with the yield maintenance, so that we wouldn't have to pay the extra $140, and they gave a bunch of other criteria that changed after the property went down. So when you're looking at a property, you need to get the numbers from the seller. If you're selling a property and you're trying to make your taxes look awesome for yours and you know you're gonna sell, my recommendation is to not make your taxes look incredibly awesome the last year you own the property. You might wanna pay a little tax, because the profit you show will dictate what the building's worth. And I can assure you this, paying a tax on an apartment building at 30%, for example, would be worth way more in the sale a year later than the amount that you're going to pay in tax. So sometimes it's worth it to make it look good. Some people inflate numbers though, so it's got to actually be real numbers. But instead of writing a bunch of stuff off that's just fake and garbage, you know, maybe you actually write real numbers.
That's
And-
with the owner's tax returns, you'll get a lot of stuff where it's crazy bills and like office supplies and like, how did this guy spend $3,000 on office supplies in 1 month? And I've seen
Yeah.
that on a lot of smaller buildings and mobile home parks, and it's just a lot of expenses, office supplies, computer supplies, just random supplies that really nobody could prove aren't actual expenses, but you can be pretty sure that you're not spending that much on the property. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. You have to be conservative, but you have to also, again, never trust the broker's numbers. So the broker might be getting the numbers from the seller, and the seller might have not wanted to pay taxes on the property for the last 10 years. So they're writing all these things in property. I've seen cars on property. Well, this is a company car, and there's 2 cars on 2 Lexuses under the property. I'm like, this is not a company car, this is your car. And yeah, you
Yeah.
might get away with using it for a company car, but it's not a company car. You're not gonna need this company car to operate this property. So lots of times you'll see crazy stuff like that on owner's tax returns.
Yeah, or you might own the property for a decade, right? And for
Yeah.
the first 9 years, you just suck it dry, right? You don't put a lot of money into it, all this stuff, right? And then the last year you realize that, you know, you wanna sell it because you wanna do A, B, or C. And so now all of a sudden you start putting, you know, multiple 6 figures into the property. Well, guess what? That
Yeah, I
that
saw
makes the books look really bad, right? So
It did,
keeping it up, I think, is kind of smart, you know, so that it is, like Jordan said, I guess a couple of months away from sale is gonna probably serve you in the long run. Maybe not the short run, you know, I get it, but in the long run probably will.
Yeah.
On the tax side of things, and I know very little about cost segregation studies for depreciation, but have you done that on these buildings? Is it worth it from an investment standpoint?
I have not, I've thought
Okay.
about it. So when I do one, we'll do another meetup and talk about that. I know
Yeah.
there's some great tax segregation experts, and yeah, it can absolutely be worth it.
I just heard, yeah, there's a definite upfront cost there, so
Yeah.
yeah, where's that breaking point where it makes sense to do it?
We're absolutely gonna do it, 100%. Yeah, but there's multiple business reasons why we should. And you know, it can be great for your investors, you know, because the way we're financing it is, I have my own personal money that's gonna be invested, but it's a fraction of the actual down payment. And so we have a lot of other people involved too. And a lot of those people will get this, you know, with the cost segregation, they're gonna receive massive tax deductions that they're not used to. Which is gonna be appealing and hopefully get them to wanna invest in more properties. I don't know a ton about it, but I've seen, you know, like they'll give you kind of like rough numbers of what you could expect on your building without doing a lot of work. And yeah, I mean, my write-off's gonna be multiple 6 figures for that, which I need actually because I'm selling a bunch of properties and not 1031ing to get the money in. So so that was one of the reasons why I said, like, look, I'll put this money in, but we need a cost seg. So it was very important to me to do that. There are benefits if you're doing a remodel. There's something called bonus depreciation. And again, I'm certainly not a tax expert, and frankly, I know not even enough to be dangerous, really. But when you've got a big building like we do, 107 units, and you're doing a larger model, and it's and you combine cost segregation with this bonus depreciation, the write-offs can be off the chart.
Are you guys talking about like a C corp? You'd have it in then, for tax segregation, or how does that work?
Tax segregation is like, so normal depreciation is just kind of like the whole building's depreciated at a certain level, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
on residential, it's 27 and a half years. You just take the building's value. If the
Right.
building were valued at 275,000, you would just subtract it by 27.5, and you get 10K per year in depreciation, right? That's like normal straight line. Cost segregation says, well, it's a $275,000 building, but you know, like it has flooring worth X, 75K, but that's only good for 5 years, not 27 and a half. So you're dividing that by 5, and it has electrical of whatever, I don't even know, 50,000, And that's good for, I don't know what the year is, so I'm gonna make this number up, that's good for 15 years, right? And they say, you know, your, different things, appliances, I think they're also 5 years, I'm pretty sure. So it has $3,000 per unit in appliances, $30,000 divided by, I think it's 5 for appliances.
So it
So
works
each
so
individual
well.
thing is broken out.
It works well because it's such a large scale, you'd have so much flooring in your huge multi-million-dollar apartment.
Yeah, well, you got
It's worth
six figures worth of flooring instead of taking it, so,
Yeah.
cause commercial is 37.5 years. So instead of taking that flooring over 37.5 years, you get it over 5, right? And if your goal is to not have the property very long, it can be pretty big, right? It also creates a pretty big bill upon sale, tax bill. So it makes it very beneficial then to continue to keep that money in that sort of investment, so that you can continue to get those deductions on the next thing, or do some sort of 1031 or something like that, right? Because there are downsides to depreciation, by the way.
What you mean, like the recapture, you could wrap that into the 1031 and push it forward?
Something like that. I'm certainly not a tax professional, so I don't wanna like
We'll
say
actually have a
absolutely, but-
tax professional speaking in October,
Okay.
something like that. Hey, look at the meetup.
Yeah,
Tax plan.
it's something like that, but I don't wanna say that that's exactly how it works, cause I frankly, I don't exactly know,
Okay.
you know? I believe that's pretty accurate, but. Dan, did you have a?
Yeah, it wasn't really about any of this, it's from a while ago.
Okay.
I was curious with like the loan guarantee and the net worth, is that something you see in small buildings as well, or is that
Okay.
usually in the larger buildings?
So in our, in the small balance, they say it's basically a non-recourse, which basically means that if the Legacy Apartments goes under, provided there's no like fraud involved in the transaction, the reason why it goes under is just economic and even poor management, but it's not fraudulent in nature. And we're doing our, and we as a management team are doing our best. They can't come after my house, my cars, any of my personal belongings, right? Non-recourse. If you get a loan through one of these commercial banks, you can technically get non-recourse, but good luck. You're gonna have to personally guarantee it, and so everything that you own is on the hook for the most part, or potentially at risk if it goes under.
Cause yeah, I was just curious for like, you know, if you find a 20-unit building, do you need someone, you know, signing on the loan that has, you know, that much net worth?
They won't look for that kind of net worth in that situation,
Okay.
but they're probably gonna actually look for you to have personal income that's adequate, and
Okay.
they're gonna treat it a smidge more like, I mean, not exactly like a traditional loan, but they are gonna look at you a little more closely, and your experience and how you plan on doing it. So those sellers' numbers matter. I can't even get a loan quote for you unless you have the income expenses from the seller. So like if a person is selling a building and it's 5+ units, there's no way to even get a loan quote without having at least what they say the income and expenses are. And the more detailed, the better it's gonna look, and actually how more accurate it's gonna be. They'll give you a quote based on the stated aspect from the seller, but it's all gonna have to be played out in due diligence. So your terms could change, right? If the seller says it's got a net operating income of 100,000, it turns out it's really 65,000 because they inflated income, and they, whatever, took a bunch of expenses and just deleted them, and the lender figured it out. Your terms can change in that situation. And another thing that Jordan said, he mentions just talking about different cap rates and like what things would, different building types would trade at. One of the things to keep in mind is the lender is going to want a debt service coverage ratio of 1.25, and so when you what this means is that for every dollar that you pay on your mortgage, they're going to want to see another quarter in profit, if you will, right? And if they don't see that, they're not going to approve the loan. So just because a seller, for example, would ask $400,000 on a building that's really profitable at $300,000, that doesn't mean the lender would lend at that number at the minimum down payment. They're going to say, great, we don't really care if the comps are, support $400,000. What we do see is that at $300,000 minus our normal down payment, the property debt debt ratios at the 1.25. At $400,000, it doesn't. So what we want you to do now is put an extra $100,000 down plus the normal down payment as it would be on the other one, right? So they're gonna calculate that out for you and say, you need to put whatever the number is, 175,000 or whatever the real number is, down, just to qualify for a loan, right? So, that's where Jordan said, like, someone who came in with a large down payment might be able to get a loan where no one else could afford it. Quite a while ago, this was a couple years ago now, we had someone, we figured out the exact most they could offer based on the debt service coverage ratio, and they got beat. And the only way to get beat on, because that was on a Fannie Mae loan, the only way you could get beat on price on that is with a larger down payment, because the math is the math. You know what I mean? So debt service coverage ratio, we're going off the seller's numbers. Based on the seller's numbers, everyone's qualification would be the exact same amount. So then it's just larger down payment to get to a higher purchase price.
So that's net, not gross, in terms of what's divided. I'm assuming it's net divided by debt service, or is it?
It's
gross?
net,
Okay.
yeah, it's net, because, gross, obviously, I mean.
Right, if you have super high expenses, that's not gonna set you up well.
Yeah, exactly, yeah,
Okay.
that's net. But, when it comes to net, when it comes to actual underwriting, they might not use the seller's expenses in the end, right? Because again, inflation, poor management, all kinds of factors, right? Maybe the seller's overpaying for some things and we can go realistically like, hey, look, the trash shouldn't be this much. The seller's asleep at the wheel, they inherited the property and they're making enough money, they don't care. That kind of thing, right? So it's not always gonna be the seller's numbers, but it's a factor to start, for sure. Any questions?
All right, awesome, thanks
All right.
guys. So, again, come to the North Star Real Estate Conference, nreconference.com. If you wanna hear smart people like Tim speak, there's gonna be 25 plus of them at this conference, and people doing anything from flipping houses to buying large apartment buildings to doing the same with commercial industrial type buildings. So, everybody you'd ever wanna meet's gonna be there. Great networking opportunity, and you're gonna be donating to charity by doing it. Any other questions? We are gonna have, so speaking of, we had a lot of tax questions, we're gonna have a tax planning meet up here in October, I think it's October. We're gonna have one coming up here soon. It's also another commercial type meetup where how to buy a building for your business is really what we're calling it, but how to use smart small business loan financing to pick up a small building for your business. And I'm gonna have a commercial broker presenting on that, and also a guy locally who's done this for a couple buildings of his business. So he has a business, he's used his business to buy 3 buildings at this point in time, and has built a pretty good little portfolio while also running a great business. So if you have a business or you know somebody that has a business, they need to take advantage of this small business loan and the strategy of buying a building for your business. Because you can build a great rental portfolio just by running your business and also growing your business. So if you've got a business and want to learn more about that, come to that. If you just want to learn more about that too, definitely come to that.
When's the couple social?
We gotta talk about that.
Oh, we don't have.
So we're gonna have a couples social meetup too, couples in real estate. Yeah. We'll get that scheduled here in the next day or two.
We want to do some fun, but yeah, so it'll be for couples. It does to get together and talk, shop, and be more social.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks for coming, guys.